When you research long enough, you get used to finding stories in unexpected places. Sometimes they start with a diary, sometimes a photograph, and sometimes just a name. For me, this story begins with a name carved on a board in a small country school in Horseshoe Bend in Maitland, New South Wales. Edwards, A.J. A name that I knew, but as a youngster, I didn't fully understand. In this podcast, we'll explore the story of my great-grandfather, Alphonsus Joseph Edwards, better known as Albert, a man who travelled from Maitland to the other side of the world to fight a war waged not only in trenches but underneath them, a war fought in darkness, in tunnels, in suffocating silence, a war he survived but never really left behind. West Maitland in 1916 was a railway town defined by labour, coal, metal, transport, and the constant rhythm of work. Albert was born here into a family firmly part of the industrial fabric. His father, Joseph Nicholas Edwards, a migrant from Liverpool in England, worked for the government railways. So did many of their neighbours. The smell of coal dust was part of daily life. Hard work was simply expected. By early 1916, Albert was 23 years and 8 months old, a motor driver by trade, 5'7.5" had a fresh complexion, grey eyes, brown hair, was a Catholic, and was living at that time at 46 Layman Street in Cooks Hill in Newcastle. These details come directly from his attestation paper, the first page of his service record. He walked into the Newcastle recruiting depot on 17th of April 1916, signing his name, A.J. Edwards, and presented himself for military service. The medical officer wrote, "Fit for active service." A small tick in a small box, a line that would shape the rest of his life. The attestation process was relatively quick. Trade, motor driver. Distinctive marks, nil. Religious denomination, Roman Catholic. Nothing here tells you he'll later be burned by mustard gas, or that he'll lose his eyesight for almost 2 weeks, or that he'll return to Australia permanently disabled, tragically dying in early middle age. But that's the strange thing about archives. They record facts, not consequences. Most men who enlisted from Maitland ended up in infantry battalions, the 34th, 35th, 36th. But Albert was sent somewhere else entirely, the Australian Mining Corps. Engineers, sappers, tunnellers. Why him? His file doesn't say. But in a region where mining was ambient, even if you weren't a miner, you understood the work. Maybe he volunteered for the higher pay. Maybe he was selected for his mechanical skill. Most likely, though, it was his much shorter than average height that really sealed the deal. Whatever the reason, he was placed on the reinforcement list for the 1st Australian Tunnelling Company, one of the most dangerous units in the AIF. After initial processing at Maitland, Albert was sent south to Victoria, to Broadmeadows Camp, a sprawling training complex full of tents, dust, horses, and the raw energy of thousands of new recruits. From there, his file moves him through several reinforcement drafts, including the miners' reinforcements at Seymour in Victoria. This wasn't standard infantry training. This was trench digging, shaft bracing, explosive placement, underground signalling, silent pickwork, and navigating subterranean galleries where one wrong tap could bring the whole ceiling down. They were miners with rifles, engineers with pickaxes, soldiers who fought every day in the dark. By 25th of October 1916, he was deemed ready. His embarkation roll records: embarked HMAT Ulysses, Melbourne, date 25th of October 2016. A troop ship heavy with equipment, reinforcements and the tension of departure. Destination: England, then France, then the tunnels. The Ulysses carried hundreds of Australians across the Indian Ocean, through the Red Sea, past the Suez Canal, into the Mediterranean and out into the Atlantic. For many, like Albert, it was their first time ever leaving Australia. For some, it would be their last. He arrived in Plymouth on 28th of December 1916. An English winter morning, grey, cold, and utterly unlike the Hunter Valley he'd left behind. From there he moved between training depots and staging areas, eventually reaching Folkestone, the final embarkation point for the Western Front. Among the other men aboard the Ulysses was sapper Alfred William Jarman, a 35-year-old shipwright from Parramatta. His portrait shows a quiet dignity, a craftsman's steadiness, a man accustomed to hard work and precision. Like Albert, he volunteered for the mining corps. They trained under the same instructors, ate in the same mess lines, endured the same endless days at sea as the ship carried hundreds of Australians toward a war none of them had yet seen. Jarman would not return. He died of wounds in June 1917 at a Canadian clearing station in Belgium, one of the many tunnellers who gave their lives long before the armistice. His grave lies in a cemetery filled with men who fought in the earth, beneath the guns of the Western Front. For Albert, men like Jarman were not statistics. They were shipmates, fellow soldiers, familiar faces lost to the mud and mines of Belgium. On 23rd of January 1917, Albert stepped onto French soil for the first time. He was now officially assigned to their first Australian tunnelling company. Their areas of operation read like a map of the war's most contested landscapes. Hill 60, the Caterpillar, the Yves Salient, Messine Ridge, Arras. These were not just battlefields, they were laid killing grounds, torn apart by artillery and riddled with underground galleries where Australians and Germans fought a hidden subterranean war. Their tasks included digging under enemy lines, laying mines, collapsing trenches, building chambers, maintaining listening posts, and above all, avoiding being blown up by German countermines. It was cold, wet, cramped, and deadly work. Only weeks into his frontline service, Albert's record shows, admitted to hospital, France, February 1917. The reason isn't stated, a common omission in wartime files, but tunnellers frequently suffered from trench fever, bronchitis, rheumatism, skin infections, exhaustion, and carbon monoxide exposure. He returned to duty in early March, a short interruption in what would become an increasingly punishing year. Then comes the line that changes everything. Wounded. Gas. 13th of March, 1918, Belgium. This was mustard gas, the most feared chemical weapon of the First World War. One of the first puzzles I faced in reconstructing Albert's story was surprisingly simple. Where was he gassed? His service record states Belgium, a neat single-word entry that seems authoritative. But when I turned to the first tunnelling company's war diary, written day by officers who were actually there, it became clear that the company was nowhere near Belgium in March 1918. They were operating in the industrial belt of northern France. Places like Vermelles, Mazingarbe, and Noël-les-Mines, repairing mine galleries under almost constant shelling. The appendix documenting the gas attack even records the men being evacuated to the Neuilly dressing station, a French medical facility. This mismatch is common in military administration. At the time, clerks often used Belgium as shorthand for the entire Flanders front. But for Albert, accuracy matters. His injury happened in France, and knowing that helps us place him back into the landscape of the war, not as an abstraction in a file, but as a man working underground in a very real, very specific place. In episode 2, we'll turn to the war diary itself and walk through those final days before the attack, hour by hour. His later medical board findings note burns to the eyes, throat, chest, skin, temporary blindness for 12 days, loss of voice for 1 month, and ongoing respiratory damage. Most soldiers gassed once took months to recover. Albert was actually gassed twice, 5 days later. Mustard gas clung to clothing. It soaked into the skin. It lingered in soil, in tunnels. It poured in low areas, the very places tunnellers worked. No man came back the same. After each exposure, Albert moved through the standard medical chain. The field ambulance, the casualty clearing station, the convalescent depot, the base depot, rejoined unit, hospital again, rejoined unit again. This cycle could break a man's body long before it broke his spirit. Yet he kept returning. That resilience was typical of tunnellers and demanded of them. In November 1918, the war ended. But the damage did not. Mustard gas scarring does not heal. Vision loss does not fully recover. Breathing becomes permanently restricted. Infections become chronic. And for Albert, these health consequences were only beginning to unfold. However, during leave in England, Albert visited Birmingham, specifically No. 1 Tibbets Lane in Harborne in Birmingham, where he met Elsie Agnes Austen, the daughter of a family connected to his Maitland neighbours. Family stories say he knocked on the door, and it was love at first sight. Elsie worked at Cadbury's, the famous chocolate factory whose welfare model would later employ even more members of the family. On 23rd of April 1919, after returning wounded from France, they married at St Mary's Church. 2 26-year-olds, one wounded, one resilient, trying to build a future from the ruins of a world war. They boarded HT Katoomba and sailed for Australia on 25th of September 1919. But the war travelled home with Albert. His medical board assessment in early 1920 reads, disability permanent, due to military service, reduction in working ability between 30 to 50%. He was then discharged as medically unfit on 23rd of April 1920. He was home, alive, and married, but utterly changed forever. In the next episode, we follow Albert underground into the world of the Australian tunnelling companies, where the war was fought in the dark, 1 yard of earth at a time.